The Zaldi spaceship, a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and power, glided through the dark expanse of space like a torch lighting the silence of the vast universe. The mighty engine screamed, breaking the tranquility of the endless void. The ship moved at unimaginable speeds, cutting through clouds of cosmic dust and unfamiliar planets, searching for a destination that the Zaldi had always believed would harbor life, but life like theirs, not life they had never imagined. The home planet of the Zaldi, where they lived, was a cold, barren world with no water. The atmosphere was thick with methane, invading the skies and creating a dense, impenetrable black curtain. This was the place where their science had evolved and flourished, where they had created life in the most extreme environment possible. They had endured and overcome thousands of years of challenges to survive. But throughout those years, one thing remained unchanged: their firm belief that water could never exist alongside life. Zaldi scientists had long established their theory. They had argued that water, while vital for life on many planets, contained too much oxygen to coexist with living organisms. A planet with too much water, they believed, could never sustain life. They prided themselves on the scientific system they had built, but it was this very system that placed a limit on what they could truly understand about the universe. But nothing is certain in this vast universe. The Zaldi ships cruised past barren planets, but none of them resembled the world they knew. They searched, but found only planets devoid of water and life, just as they had expected. Their research, experiments, and relentless journeys only reinforced their belief in their theory. Until one day, when the Zaldi spaceship discovered, for the first time, a planet with water. This planet, with 71% of its surface covered in water, was like a stain on everything they had ever believed. They could hardly believe their eyes when they saw the results of their first survey. Water had flooded the surface of the planet. And with water, there was life. How could this be? How could life exist in such an environment? The universe, it seemed, was full of surprises, and nothing was certain. During an endless journey through the vast expanse of space, the Zaldi spaceship, long accustomed to the endless silence of the cosmos, unexpectedly discovered a new planet. A planet that, at first glance, seemed like a massive mystery hiding in the darkness. Signals from the survey equipment came through, containing information that even the most brilliant scientists of the Zaldi species could not immediately explain. They expanded the parameters, double-checked the readings, and discovered something that left the entire research team in shock. This planet, which they had predicted would not be capable of sustaining life, was made up of 71% water. Unbelievable. That amount of water, in their theory, was a sign of death. They had always argued that any planet with more than a certain amount of water could not sustain life. But this was an unimaginable truth. This planet had water, and it had life. Strange plants, creatures moving in the oceans and on the land, were thriving, completely contradicting the Zaldi belief that water would make life impossible. Then, a strange signal was received from a spaceship of another alien race, humans. These signals confused the Zaldi systems, almost like a challenge, forcing them to confront a question they had never had to ask themselves. How could a life form exist in an environment with so much water? The signals from the human spacecraft contained strange information about how humans had developed on a planet that was 71% water. The first exchanges between the Zaldi and humans took place in a hazy space, filled with doubt and curiosity. The Zaldi, who had always prided themselves on their survival on a cold, barren planet, now had to face a new reality they could not explain. They sent out questions about life and the possibility of organisms surviving on a planet with so much water. The answers from the humans only confused them further, because humans, from a planet with such a large percentage of water, were thriving and developing normally. This exchange didn't just represent a step forward in understanding humans, but also marked an expansion of the Zaldi's own awareness. They had to face the truth. Their science, the theories they had upheld for thousands of years, were now proven wrong. Humans, beings from a planet with water far beyond what the Zaldi had ever imagined, could exist and thrive. Life didn't just have to exist on barren planets, it could flourish on worlds rich in water, something they had once believed impossible. This dialogue not only changed the Zaldi's perception of life, but it also made them reconsider the hypotheses they had built over millennia. Every bit of information, every explanation from the humans, was like a puzzle piece in a larger picture, peeling back a mystery that the Zaldi had never considered. Now, they were not just faced with a question about life, but with something they had never imagined. Life could exist in a world they had once believed was inhospitable. Feelings of confusion and humility gradually replaced the arrogance that had long resided in the hearts of the Zaldi. And in that moment, they realized that the path of space exploration wasn't just about seeking out planets with conditions similar to their own. It was about discovering the infinite possibilities that they had never considered. As the Zaldi began their initial experiments, everything seemed to be in the early stages of exploration, like stepping into an unknown world. They sent samples from Earth into a special glass chamber, where a water-based environment was artificially created to observe how these life forms interacted with water. They watched as tiny marine organisms, which humans called plankton, swam back and forth in the water, multiplying naturally. Their movements were simple, yet carried a mystery that the Zaldi researchers couldn't immediately comprehend. At first, the experiments seemed trivial, but when the results began to flood in, everything quickly became incomprehensible. Some marine organisms, which according to Zaldi theory should not be able to survive in water, were thriving, growing, even reproducing under conditions the Zaldi had never imagined. The bacteria, the deep-sea organisms, the creatures of the ocean depths that the Zaldi had never thought could exist, began to explode in their experiments, sparking questions that had no answers. They were able to live in extreme cold temperatures, where light never reached, in environments with extremely high salinity, conditions that had always been considered death traps for any life form. The experiments didn't stop with marine creatures. A soil sample from another part of Earth, a place that was hot and arid, was placed in the glass chamber as well. And the result was astonishing. A tiny plant, once thought incapable of surviving in such a confined space, began to sprout and push its way through the dry soil. The Zaldi looked at these small sprouts in disbelief. Impossible! How could these life forms survive under conditions they had once believed were inhospitable? The deeper the Zaldi delved into their experiments, the more questions arose. Each test, each step in their research took them further away from the theory they had held onto for thousands of years. How could life flourish on a planet that contained 71% water, under the harsh conditions the Zaldi had always believed made survival impossible? Any organism the Zaldi had thought incapable of surviving now showed the ability to thrive and multiply more than ever. The Zaldi researchers began to feel a tremor in their hearts as they realized that they were no longer simply exploring a new planet, but facing the collapse of an entire system of theory they had built and trusted for generations. Their doubts grew stronger as the results from the experiments revealed that these creatures didn't just survive in water, they thrived under the most extreme conditions. Mangrove swamps, the deep ocean floor where sunlight never touched, areas with temperatures and pressures so high that they should have been unbearable, yet life existed. These creatures didn't need light, they didn't need ideal conditions, they thrived and grew stronger than ever, overcoming every challenge the Zaldi had thought was insurmountable. This discovery began to dismantle the long-held theory that water could never support life. The Zaldi researchers began to realize that there was something greater at play, something they hadn't fully understood. These organisms didn't just exist under harsh conditions, they thrived. There was something about how they existed, how they interacted with their environments, that the Zaldi couldn't yet explain. And it was this mystery that kept their confusion and tension alive, as the scientists of Zaldi began to doubt everything they had once known. The experiments continued, only increasing the sense of unease. Each result further flipped their scientific theories in ways that were hard to believe. Why could these creatures survive under such extreme conditions? What made them able to survive and thrive, despite not following the Zaldi scientific framework? These questions crashed into the minds of the researchers like storm waves, with no clear answers in sight, leaving them in a state of constant, unresolved wonder. As the Zaldi embarked on their first experiments, everything seemed to be in the early stages of exploration, like an intrusion into an unknown world. They had sent Earth samples into a special chamber, where a water-based environment was artificially created to observe how the organisms interacted with the water. The Zaldi watched as tiny marine creatures, known as plankton on Earth, swam back and forth, multiplying naturally. Their movements were simple, but they carried a mystery that the Zaldi researchers couldn't quite comprehend. At first, the experiments seemed elementary, but as results poured in, everything quickly turned incomprehensible. Some marine organisms that Zaldi had believed couldn't survive in water began thriving, growing, even reproducing under conditions the Zaldi had never considered. The bacteria, deep-sea organisms, the creatures of the ocean depths, which Zaldi thought could never exist, began exploding in their experiments, sparking questions that had no answers. These organisms survived in extreme cold temperatures, where light never touched, in environments with incredibly high salinity, conditions that had always been considered death traps for any form of life. The experiments didn't stop with marine life. A sample of soil from another part of Earth, a hot and arid place, was placed into the glass chamber as well. And the result was astonishing. A tiny plant, once thought to be incapable of surviving in such a confined space, began to sprout and push its way through the dry soil. The Zaldi researchers stared at these sprouts in disbelief. Impossible. How could these life forms survive under conditions they had once believed to be inhospitable? The deeper the Zaldi dug into their experiments, the more questions arose. Each test, each step in their research, pulled them further away from the theory they had held onto for thousands of years. How could life thrive on a planet that contained 71% water, under the harsh conditions the Zaldi had always believed made survival impossible? Any organism they had once thought incapable of surviving now showed the ability to thrive and multiply stronger than ever. The Zaldi researchers could feel the tremors of disbelief as they realized they were no longer simply exploring a new planet, but confronting the collapse of an entire system of theory they had trusted for generations. Their doubts grew stronger as the results from the experiments revealed that these creatures didn't just survive in water. They thrived under the most extreme conditions. Mangrove swamps, the deep ocean floor where sunlight never touched, areas with temperatures and pressures so high that they should have been unbearable, yet life existed. These creatures didn't need light. They didn't need ideal conditions. They thrived and grew stronger than ever, overcoming every challenge the Zaldi had thought was insurmountable. This discovery began to dismantle the long-held theory that water could never support life. The Zaldi researchers started to realize that something far bigger was at play, something they hadn't fully understood. These organisms didn't just exist under harsh conditions, they thrived. There was something about how they existed, how they interacted with their environments, that the Zaldi couldn't yet explain. And it was this mystery that kept their confusion and tension alive, as the scientists of Zaldi began to doubt everything they had once known. The experiments continued, only increasing the sense of unease. Each result further flipped their scientific theories in ways that were hard to believe. Why could these creatures survive under such extreme conditions? What made them able to survive and thrive, despite not following the Zaldi scientific framework? These questions crashed into the minds of the researchers like storm waves, with no clear answers in sight, leaving them in a state of constant, unresolved wonder. As the Zaldi spacecraft drifted silently through the vast expanse of space, the ship's sleek design gleamed under the distant stars. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the hum of advanced technology reverberating through the walls. The researchers, a mix of seasoned scientists and eager young minds, gathered around the central table, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of data screens. They were on the verge of a discovery that could shatter the foundation of everything they had ever believed about life and its existence. Dr. Callis, the head of one of the most prominent research teams, stood at the forefront, his expression heavy with the weight of centuries of knowledge. His voice cracked as he addressed the room. For thousands of years, we have stood as the pinnacle of survival. We have withstood the harshest environments, evolved in a world devoid of water, and we believed we understood life. But now, we are faced with a discovery that challenges everything we know. How can we accept this new reality? How can we embrace a truth we cannot physically see or comprehend? Lyra, a younger scientist with a bright, determined look in her eyes, stood up. We can't keep clinging to old beliefs just because they've served us for centuries. We were wrong about water and life. The creatures from Earth are thriving in conditions we thought were impossible. Should we remain shackled to our past, or should we embrace the future with all its uncertainty? Her words hung in the air, and the room fell silent. The team exchanged uneasy glances. The debate that followed was heated and filled with frustration. Dr. Callis stood firm in his belief that the Zaldi way of thinking had served them well, but deep down, he began to question the very foundation of their scientific understanding. For the first time, he felt the weight of their theories crumbling before him. As the hours passed, the tension in the room grew unbearable. The Zaldi, a species that had prided itself on its resilience and unwavering scientific approach, was now facing a profound dilemma. Should they change their entire worldview and open themselves to the unknown, or should they cling to the safety and certainty of their established beliefs? The debate reached its peak when Dr. Callis, his voice shaking with the realization of the inevitable, addressed his colleagues one final time. This isn't just about science anymore. This is about the future of our species. We have a choice to make, a choice between clinging to the past or stepping into a new era of discovery. Lyra's voice was firm as she spoke. If we choose to remain in the shadows of old theories, we risk stagnation. But if we dare to accept the unknown, we could change the course of our future. The Earth's creatures have shown us that life can thrive in ways we never imagined. It's time for us to evolve, just as they have. And with that, the room erupted into a storm of voices, each scientist grappling with the implications of the choice before them. The debate would continue long into the night, but one thing was certain. The Zaldi were at the crossroads of an era, and the path they chose would shape the future of their species. In the end, it wasn't just about science. It was about their willingness to change, to challenge their own assumptions, and to open their minds to the possibilities of a universe that was far more mysterious and complex than they had ever imagined. The conference room was eerily silent. The glow from the screens illuminated the faces of the Zaldi scholars, casting deep shadows that seemed to stretch and fill the room, as if the darkness was slowly consuming the very hearts of those present. They were facing a monumental turning point in the history of their species. But now, the biggest question was not what change could bring, but whether they had the courage to confront it. Lyra's words, spoken with a sharp, youthful determination, echoed in their minds. Can we accept this new truth, or will we remain forever trapped in the shadow of the past? It was a question that could not be easily answered, especially when the theories that had been steadfast for millennia were now threatened by an unexpected discovery. Dr. Callis, the leader and guiding force of the Zaldi research community, was still fresh in their minds. He was the one who had steered them to where they were, but now he was faced with the truth that there was no absolute certainty in science. He and his people had been too proud, too certain that what had been proven was all they needed to know. They had forgotten that science is ever-evolving. No theory lasts forever. And today, their great theory of life had been shattered, like a torch illuminating the path forward. But would they have the courage to step into that light? Things had moved so quickly. The Earth creatures, which they had once deemed incapable of surviving in their harsh conditions, now thrived, full of vitality. Not only could they survive in water, but they could endure environments the Zaldi had long considered lethal. This forced the Zaldi to reevaluate everything they had held true, the theories about water, life, and the very assumptions they had made about the universe. All of it now had to be reconsidered. The big question now was not how the Zaldi would change, but if they would change at all. It was a crossroads in their evolution, a change they could not avoid if they wished to continue advancing. But this change was not easy. It struck at their pride, at the very foundation they had built over thousands of years. The Zaldi scholars exchanged uneasy glances, then turned their eyes back to the data, to the information that had shaken their world. No matter what they wished, the truth could not remain hidden. They could continue living in their old theoretical world, but that world was crumbling, making room for new discoveries and a future they had never dared to imagine. Would they open themselves to the change and learn from humanity? Or would they continue to shut themselves off from things they had yet to understand? No one could answer that question immediately. It would be a journey, a struggle not just to conquer the universe, but to conquer themselves, to accept humility and embrace the new. And in the stillness of the room, the great question reverberated in the hearts of every Zaldi present. Would they have the courage to change, or would they forever live in the shadow of the past? The story does not end here. It is only just beginning. The story of the Zaldi species is a profound reminder of the dangers of complacency and closed-mindedness, not only in science but in life. It speaks to the heart of human nature. How often do we cling to what we think we know, refusing to question long-held beliefs? We pride ourselves on being intellectually advanced, yet so many of us are afraid to embrace the unknown, the uncertain. This is especially true when our identities and worldviews are at stake. What strikes me most about this tale is the tension between maintaining pride in our established knowledge and the willingness to learn from the unexpected. The Zaldi's journey mirrors the challenges we face every day in our societies. We can become so attached to our traditions, to the systems we've built, that we refuse to see the cracks forming beneath them. Whether it's in science, politics, or personal relationships, we often stubbornly hold on to outdated ways of thinking, not realizing that the world around us is evolving, and those old ways might be holding us back. The lesson here is one of humility, the ability to accept that we do not know everything, and that growth comes from being open to new ideas, new ways of thinking. As we navigate our rapidly changing world, we must be willing to admit when we are wrong, to challenge our assumptions, and to open ourselves up to the possibility of being surprised. In a time where the future seems uncertain, perhaps the greatest act of bravery is to accept the unknown with curiosity rather than fear. Just like the Zaldi, we too must be willing to question our deepest beliefs and embrace the new. Only then can we evolve.